Open Your Eyes is brought to you by the Belize Bank. Our country, your bank.
Welcome to Open Your Eyes.
Good morning, right?
I'm Marlene Cuellar.
I'm Asana Keita.
And thank you for joining us this morning. It is a Tuesday morning. Of course, we know that it has already started off as a warm day, and we're going to get our update from Ronald Gordon as to what we can expect for today. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Marlene.
How are you doing, Ronald?
I am doing okay.
All right. So let's talk about our weather for today.
Okay, our weather is going to continue seasonably hot, dry, and hazy. We're looking at mostly sunny and hazy conditions today, and clear to partly cloudy skies tonight. We don't expect any rainfall.
All right. And winds?
Winds are out of the east and southeast at 10 to 20 knots with higher gusts, and sea conditions moderate to rough.
Okay.
We do have a small craft cushion in effect.
Okay. And these temperatures, let's talk about how hot it's going to be today.
It's going to continue hot. We expect maximum temperatures of about 88 along the coast today. Inland about 97. That's the average. You can also go up to 100 in some areas, no? And up in the hills, we expect about 85 Fahrenheit. We do have our advisory out for the excessive hot conditions. So we advise residents to avoid direct sunlight and to remain hydrated.
That's right. And for tonight, what can we expect?
Okay, tonight it's going to continue warm with about 81 Fahrenheit along coastal areas, a bit cooler inland with 73 Fahrenheit, and 57 if you're up in the mountains.
Yeah. You're very precise. Hot days and warm nights. I do appreciate that the Met Service has been continuously providing the advisory about people avoiding direct sunlight and, of course, staying hydrated. You've also been reminding people about the risk of forest fires at this time.
That's right. We also, yes, indeed, and we also have the advisory out for the risk of brush and forest fires. What we have been noticing on our satellite imagery is that there's a lot of fires over the area, and it's producing smokiness over the area right now. So some of that haze that you're seeing is due to forest fires across the country, and also from the region, Guatemala and Honduras as well.
Okay. So it's not the time to be lighting up any brush, any garbage, anything in your area.
Yeah, well, unless you can manage it, very carefully, but I would advise against it in general.
Okay. And the extended forecast?
We're looking at continuing hot and dry weather for the next few days. I'm not seeing any changes at all, actually.
Well, it is the dry season, and we know that the Met Service has already indicated that we're most likely going to be experiencing a drought as well, right?
Yes, our indications are that the dry season is going to be intense, and one of the most worrisome factors is that it appears that we're going to be repeating next year in terms of even when we are looking at the summer months, June, July, August, the rainfall is expected to be below normal. So that's a major concern right now for, especially for the agricultural sector. No?
That's right. All right. Well, we'll keep on paying attention as the season progresses. We thank you for the update for today.
Sure. You're welcome.
Have a great day. All right, there you have it. Another hot day ahead. You know,
I noticed that in Belmopan yesterday, Marlene, it was up to 103 degrees. Yeah. Scorching.
Yeah. But you know, this is why the Met Service provides this advisory to people that if you are in the inland areas, you're going to be experiencing much higher temperatures, and of course with the humidity it feels even hotter. They advise that people don't go out into the direct sunlight during the daytime hours. And also, if you are indoors, which we all are at this time, you want to ensure that you stay hydrated. Even if you're in shade, you still want to make sure you're hydrated. And that's especially for the little ones and the elderly. They don't always recognize their thirst, so you want to ensure that they're drinking water as often as possible. All right, we're going to keep things moving. There's a lot to get into, but we're going to take some time for a bit of motivation. And our eye-opener for today, taken from dailyom.com, goes like this. Present time can be hard, but life unfolds as it will, and the universe will wait as we make our way into the unknown. Whether we envision ourselves creating a career, building a family, or developing the self, we instinctively know when the time has come for us to realize our dreams, because all that is involved comes together harmoniously. When the time is right, the passage of destiny cannot be blocked. Yet, as desperate as we are to touch these beautiful futures we have imagined, we cannot grow if we're not fully present in the evolutionary experience. When you feel yourself growing impatient because the pace of your development is deceptively slow, remember that everything that you will encounter in your life will occur in its own time. Quelling your urge to rush will enable you to witness yourself learning, changing, and becoming stronger. There's so much to see and do in between the events and processes that we deem definitive. If you're patient enough to take pleasure in your existence's unfolding, the journey from one pinnacle to the next will seem to take no time at all.
Marlene, this speaks to setting life goals and the fact that there are some events in your life that you can plan for and achieve in a timely, scheduled manner. And there are other things that you just simply have to allow to fall in place, right? When you look at the idea of embarking upon a career and you tell yourself, this is my plan for the next 8 years, for instance, right? You'll go to school, you'll educate yourself, qualify yourself, and then you'll come into the world of work and establish yourself as a professional. You can set a timeline for that.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the fact that there may be certain detours here and there, because oftentimes we begin a job and we look to that as, you know, our career path, but things happen, right? Perhaps you start off at the income tax department and end up becoming somebody else or doing something altogether different. But the point is, while you can set specific goals for that, there are certain things in your life where you just have to allow it to fall in place. Simply because, insofar as building a family, for instance, right? You could have an idea. I'd say, okay, when I'm 32, I want to be able to have, you know, a wife and a kid and begin settling down and looking towards the future as a family person. But things can happen at 32 years old that totally takes you in a different direction. Or you may have already begun on that path and you are forced to take a detour. Not the fact that you don't have a wife and a kid, for instance, but something happens and you need to be patient. Rushing it and trying to get to that end result can create mistakes that you will end up regretting down the road. So when I look at this eye-opener, I'm thinking, okay, there has to be some balance between the things that you can practically set out to do and some things you allow the divinity, so to speak, to fall into place and allow you to get there. That's how I look at it.
Well, there's a saying that comes to mind for me. Life is what happens when you're busy making plans.
Yeah.
And that's just my takeaway from this. We are definitely all having a collective experience in uncertainty. And I think that perhaps our hyper-focus on looking at the end only leads to more frustration. It's the same with other life goals that you make, because it takes time. And that's what we're in right now. It's being able to appreciate the things of the present day. Today you wake up, you have your kids with you, you're not going to work. You get to tackle all the odd jobs around your house that you didn't have time for before. There's so many little things that we can be thankful for. A lot of us, majority of us, can be thankful for our health, especially given the current crisis. So I think that especially or context of today, we need to look at what we can appreciate in present day, because we will have time to get towards these plans, and we'll have to work on these plans that we set out. But in the moment, don't miss what's happening right in front of you.
Let me use a personal example here, right? I'll just throw this out there as food for thought for other young men and women. When you're growing up, there are certain goals that your parents and by extension your family would want you to aspire to, right? You go to school, you get a good job, you build your family, and then you build your home, and you live happily ever after, right? To some people, those are goals that are readily attainable.
Yeah.
To other people, those are goals that you'll spend perhaps a lifetime trying to achieve each individual rung on that ladder.
Yeah.
So for me, to a great extent, I followed those goals. I would want to say almost to a science, right? To a fault, right? But then I realized it won't happen at the time when you want it to happen based on several different factors, right? So I went to school, qualified myself, and I came back and I realized, okay, now it's time for a job. And I looked high and low, I looked everywhere, and couldn't really find the job that I wanted in terms of what I went to school for and what I studied. Eventually that happened, right? And then you moved into dating and taking someone seriously and what have you. And if at that point I would have thought, or it crossed my mind that, okay, this is the woman I'm going to either marry or spend the rest of my life with. A couple years later, you realize, you know what? This is the detour. Because perhaps this is not necessarily the relationship that allows me to grow and blossom and be that person. And so I'm saying that because it would have taken several years later and several other smaller goals to achieve the end result, which is to have a family, which is to have a home, and which is to have everything sort of in sync with each other.
Yeah.
And it's just something that I'm throwing out there for other people to see that, you know, it does not happen overnight.
Oh, it certainly doesn't. But, you know, that's our eye-opener for this morning,
Yeah.
and we hope that you take it into your daily reflection. Of course, as we started with the show, we said there's a lot to get into. You know, 4 days were double the cases that we left off on Thursday, and there was a lot that took place over the weekend. So we're going to get moving into or Eye on the News.
All right, so when we left on Holy Thursday, it was with a set number of cases going into the 4-day weekend. And as you said, Marlene, it has virtually doubled since then. We've also seen our second COVID-19 related death as well. So what we have is a chart that depicts where we are presently, and then we can backtrack a bit to establish how we got to where we are at current. All right, so the first point of focus, Marlene, and I won't go through every individual case per se. I'll begin firstly by discussing one of those that is most pertinent, which is the death of another patient who suffered from COVID-19. So the 10th case was confirmed on the morning of April 10th, right? After tests had been conducted and the positive result was returned on April 9th, the night before. And it is most unfortunate that in the same manner in which this case was made public, the patient died several hours later. Notwithstanding the fact that he had visited several doctors, including a prominent medical institution here in Belize City, where tests had initially been ran on the individual, and in the first instance it came back negative. And when the individual was transferred and the central medical labs did their test, it came back positive.
Yeah.
And regrettably, this individual passed away. Not before, however, transmitting it to other persons within his family. And as a result, we've gotten releases from several organizations, if I may. One with the Belize Healthcare Partners Limited, where the individual had sought medical attention. Again, this is in the first instance.
Yeah.
Another from the Carl Huchner Memorial Hospital Workers Union and from the authority. And of course, another from James Brody and Company Limited, where the family members of this individual worked. And they too were exposed, and I believe when we look at the nexus in terms of the transmission of the virus, it is safe to say that 2 persons from his family have contracted the coronavirus. So that to me, Marlene, is one of the more important cases in terms of how it spread from that one particular individual. Yeah. Right? A name has been given. I'm not going to get into the names at this point in time. Suffice to say, Marlene, that this was only one case in which I believe it has been looked at as a matter of a community spread. You correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, but it's also created what they call a cluster, and we do want to say we're going to be talking with Dr. Manzanero in a bit so he can explain that further. But what it means is this one case has kind of created other cases just based on close proximity. Patient 10, I think, has triggered a lot of concerns for several reasons. You're looking at 10 or 11 days where he was hospitalized without being tested positive for COVID-19. Belize Healthcare Partners did 2 tests on him, which came back negative, and I think that's a question that people are going to have and want answers for. How did this happen? Of course, these tests are done at Central Medical Lab. It's just who takes the swab that is then sent to the lab. And I do know from previous interviews with technicians at the lab that it is a process where you do have to be accurate. The test can be accurate, but also the collection of the sample is also a critical part of the process. He didn't test positive until, of course, he was in the ICU at KHMH. What we do know from the Healthcare Partners release is that they're saying all the staff that came in contact with the patient have tested negative so far, but they will be in isolation nonetheless. And it's triggered so many other things since then, which I'm sure you're going to get into.
So in respect of this second death, the government of Belize, through the press office, issued an official statement. As I mentioned, within a few hours of having initially mentioned that there was a 10th patient. It says here, the government of Belize and the Ministry of Health regret to inform the death of patient confirmed earlier as the 10th case of COVID-19. The patient had been receiving treatment as of March 27th at a private medical facility in Belize City. While there, the patient was swabbed twice and the samples sent to the Central Medical Laboratory for testing for COVID-19. Both tests proved inconclusive. The patient was then transferred to the Carl Huchner Memorial Hospital on Tuesday, April 7th from the private facility. He arrived intubated and was admitted into intensive care upon arrival and placed into a single private room in the General Adult Intensive Care Unit. He had been connected to a ventilator at the private hospital since March 31st with progressive deterioration and complications since then. One of those complications being a stroke. The patient was swabbed at the KHMH and that test produced a positive result for COVID-19. As per infection control procedures, the staff members who attended the patient in the ICU at the KHMH were wearing personal protective equipment. The mapping exercise, which includes immediate contacts and healthcare workers, at both the private facility and the KHMH is currently ongoing. So that sort of bolsters what you mentioned earlier, Marlene, insofar as the contact tracing exercise that is being undertaken both at the BHPL, at the KHMH, and of course the immediate family members of this individual. And so several cases emanated out of this one particular case involving this individual. And there were others reported in Corozal, I believe, and another in the Cayo district. And they were all related to persons who had been previously diagnosed with COVID-19.
It seems from the releases that that the Ministry of Health has put out that the cases that were all diagnosed, with the exception of patient 10, were close contact cases. But of course, Isani, this case, as we said, has triggered a lot of concern, and we can't miss what is the biggest news here, which is that starting Saturday night at 8 p.m., the entire country is on a 14-day lockdown, which is a significant change from what the state of emergency is, which started on April 2nd.
Yeah.
So I was doing a bit of a timeline. It's been a lot of change just in a short period of time. You're looking at March 16th, where it was first declared that we were kind of monitoring the situation. Gatherings were cut down to 100. Schools will close on the 20th. On the 20th, schools close. The 23rd, we saw the first case. We saw quite a bit. The 20th, the school closed. The 23rd, we saw the first case. And we're just looking at every few days, there's kind of a major development taking place that changes the dynamics of what we're experiencing. By April 2nd, which was the end of that week, there was the start of the state of emergency. And that was for 30 days. Right after that, we had patient 3 diagnosed, and he died by the Sunday, which was April 5th. And then we had another death, as you mentioned, patient 10. And of course, we started the national lockdown this Saturday evening. So,
so to continue, continue from where you left off, in terms of the national lockdown, which began on Saturday evening, the Attorney General, who's also the Minister of National Security, he gave a statement outlining what the new state of affairs are in terms of Sundays and going forward, based on the amplification, if I may, of these particular cases. And so you would find that on Easter Sunday, everywhere was under lockdown, right? So what would have been traditional for persons to go out and do their Sunday shopping or whatever, as far as we know, that is the status quo going forward, right? So that Sundays are off the table until we get a handle on this situation.
So it's going to be 2 Sundays because it's 14 days. We went through the first one. There are quite a number of arrests made as a result.
People were still wandering around both aimlessly and outside of the curfew hours. And another arrest that came out of what has transpired over the weekend was that of Jose Luis Espat, who has been vocal on the social media space with his own perspectives. It has since been found out some of what he has put out there was grossly inaccurate, and that resulted in him being arrested and charged for the spreading of false news. So that's one other little feature there. The other thing here, Marlene, we're looking at is the fact that the leader of the opposition also came out with a statement of his own on Holy Saturday, where for some people, as a matter of a point of view or a perspective, the statement has, for all intents and purposes, sort of drawn a political line in the middle of what should have been a bipartisan or, to some, a non-partisan movement in terms of trying to get Belize COVID-free. And it's a point of concern because there were several points being raised by the leader of the opposition, some which, are in fact points that, you know, people should be looking at.
Yeah.
There were others as well where you kind of have to question, you know, what the position is insofar as where he's going. The overall result of the leader of the opposition statement, nonetheless, is that he is now contemplating whether he's going to remain as the co-chair of the National Oversight Committee and whether other members of the People's United Party, the opposition, who have been placed on other boards and task forces, will remain on as well, based on the position being taken by the People's United Party. And I'm thinking it's not necessarily the time
Well, yeah.
for that.
I mean, I
It's
think
not an
that's
issue
just
to
my
be taken
initial,
as a political football.
That's my initial reaction. This is not the time for politics. This is not the time for politicking. This is not the time for dividing people red and blue. I know there are concerns, and he's pointed out, and some of the points, as you said, are valid. But I think that what we need to be careful of is if we get dragged down into this very divisive culture that we have with political lines, because we don't need people to be focusing on anything else other than being able to follow through on what we have to do to keep Belize with minimal cases of COVID-19. The minute we get distracted with the politicking, the minute we start to feel that everything is going to be divided based on, and this goes for both parties. This goes for any political person who is using politics as a way of how they're going to offer aid, which is just plain wrong. And also for just kind of introducing ideas of, you know, people are playing politics. I think we need to be as mature as possible about this issue. And, you know, quite frankly, I even in the news cycle, I'd much more prefer we spend our time on helping to educate people rather than trying to play this political football that we know happens in almost every major issue in this country. This is not just about an election. This is about lives. And that's the fundamental issue. I did want to bring up, since you, that the Prime Minister is actually in a state of self-isolation at this time, because one of the police officers that is assigned to him is a family member of patient number 10. We did forget to mention that. So he did say that in his address as well. There's been 2 closures, I think, as a result of patient 10 as well. James Brody's downtown has closed until April 20th. Scotiabank downtown has closed, and of course this is all because of members of staff who have had close contact with patient 10. The Ministry of Health, actually, Sonny, and I think this is a crucial time to get this information in, is asking, so there was a function that patient 10 attended on March 14th, which it was a party. It was at the time when you were allowed to have gatherings of up to 100 people, and 5 people have since tested positive. I think 5 is the right number, but I stand to be corrected. A number of people have tested positive who have attended that party, including patient 10. So what they're asking is, if you attended that party on Saturday, March 14th, they're asking you to contact the Ministry of Health hotline, 0800 MOH CARE. They are considering this to be a source factor for an active cluster, which means an active number of cases coming out of that event. And if you have attended and you have symptoms, call the Ministry of Health and keep on monitoring how you're feeling as well. So that's really important information for people to know if you did attend that event on March 14th at the Plaza Diner, I believe. That number is 0800 MOH CARE, or you can also call 613-0787.
So it's a lot to digest based on what all has transpired over the course of the past 4 days. We know that we will have online with us later in the show
Yeah.
the Director of Health Services to answer some of the questions that we would have as hosts of the morning show coming out of the weekend. I know that among them perhaps is the status of where we are insofar as the number of tests, the access to tests, and what have you. I think that is one of the critical points, considering the fact that going into the weekend, we were made to understand that Belize had essentially refused or rejected the offer of 25,000 test kits. We were only left with 700 as we had. So where are we with that? That's a question that we can ask the DHS. So, but for us, that rounds out the Eye on the News for this morning.
Absolutely. All right. All right, and we're back and we're getting ready to move into our show for today. Of course, we're starting off with an update from Dr. Marvin Manzanero, the Director of Health Services, and we're going to get the latest as to what's happening in terms of a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we're continuing.
The second part of the show focuses on tips for trimming one's budget, and this comes courtesy of St. John's Credit Union, who we will have a guest with us, a credit officer, discussing ways to trim your budget.
All right, and at-home hair care. Quite a number of people are struggling. They can't get to their barber. They can't get to their hairdresser. Ladies, we are actually going to have the owner of Purple Passion Studio Spa talking to us via Skype, of course, as to what you can do to do that touch-up color at home.
And then we're going to have our kids' time,
Yes.
which has become a feature of our show for the past few weeks. And during kids' time, we will be discussing the solar system. That's for little kiddies at home.
And so we're going to go ahead and take a break, but before we do, we have a special birthday shout out today. It's a belated birthday shout out. On Sunday, this young lady turned 16 years old.
Wow.
And of course, she was a bit disappointed that she didn't get a chance to have her sweet 16 party. But we do hope that you had an enjoyable day at home with your family and loved ones. And we say a happy belated birthday to Kaylee Castillo.
Happy
16.
belated, Kaylee.
All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we'll have an update from Dr. Marvin Manzanero. So stay tuned.
With over 100 years of service excellence.
Uh-oh, what are those?
Germs!
That's right, they're germs, and they love to spread.
Uh-oh!
And how do they spread?
Hands!
Germs can spread everywhere from hands, and from hands they move on to food, toys, other hands, and faces.
Yuck!
Germs make people sick, and that's why it's very important to wash hands.
Hooray!
It's important to wash your hands, so follow these steps to do it right.
1,
Turn on the water and wet your hands.
2,
Use soap to lather your hands and scrub.
3,
Rinse your hands completely.
4,
Now that your hands are clean, use a paper towel to touch the handle and turn off the water.
5.
Dry your hands with a paper towel.
Hooray!
Follow these steps every time and you'll keep germs away. So remember, the best way to fight germs is wash hands.
Get information from a respectable international or official local source. When in doubt of COVID-19 information, verify before sharing or repeating the information. Prepare for COVID-19 with an easy plan of action for yourself and your family to put into practice to avoid or reduce the spread of the illness. Be calm and continue to stay informed of the developments of COVID-19. Adjust your plans where necessary based on official advisories. Your local health authority can provide the best information on whether COVID-19 is spreading in your area. If you become seriously ill with cold or flu-like symptoms, please contact your doctor or nearest health center. For more information, contact the Ministry of Health at our toll-free number 0800 MOH Care or through our Facebook pages, the Ministry of Health Belize or the Office of the Director of Health Services. We are here to help you. A health and wellness message from your Ministry of Health.
COVID-19 update is brought to you by Full Tech Systems. You'll come for the price, but stay for the service.
And we are back, and we are moving into our first conversation for this morning. We are joined via Skype by Dr. Marvin Manzanero, the Director of Health Services, to get the latest update on the COVID-19 situation in Belize. Good morning, Dr. Manzanero.
Good morning, Marlene.
Good morning, Doc.
All right.
All right, so where do we begin from, Doc? A lot has transpired over the past 4 days. From an official medical perspective, where are we?
Well, yeah, the last, I think, 4 or 5 days have been rather critical in the sense that we, as you will note, figures kind of doubled in 4 or 5 days. It just means an issue of identifying cases that were out there. We had 1 death associated to COVID-19, so that brings us a total of 2, and a total number of cases of 18, with 2 patients being hospitalized and the remaining being treated or cared for at home. 18 is the total number of cases we have, with Belize District having, of course, a higher number, Cayo having the second higher number, and those, as we reported yesterday, were clusters or small groups of patients that we are following.
Yeah. So let's start with that. We're looking at Belize District having the highest number of cases at this time, 8, in fact, of the 18. The last release that went out, you said that you expect that there's an active cluster. What does that mean?
Well, if you recall the first cases from Belize City, we had cases 1 and 2 in San Pedro that did not, we have not been able to identify any other case linked to those 2 cases. And then we had a case number 3 in Belize City that also has not allowed us to identify, that we have not identified any other case. We had mentioned that mapping exercises are going to be contingent on the amount of contacts you have, that's one, and also how long it takes for us to make a diagnosis. So the longer you take, the more likely it is that your social circle is extended. So in the case of patient number 10, that's the one that we have identified at least 4 other persons that are positive, and that's what we call an active cluster, because that has produced 5 cases linked to one case. So that's why it's called an active cluster, because we're trying to identify all other potential cases that are linked to that one single case.
Now, this emanated from an event that these individuals attended? Is that what you guys are asking as a ministry for persons to come forward?
Yeah, you see, when you start doing your mapping exercise, you don't know what exactly happened. You know, in the particular case of patient number 10, we were, looking at the 10 days he was in the hospital prior to coming to Cardiusha at a private institution. So you do that exercise in terms of all potential healthcare workers that have been exposed at both institutions. And those are the, what we call, you go for the, and try to identify if any healthcare worker has been exposed. All those persons were swabbed on through the extended weekend, and we turned out to have all of them turned out negative, including the people from birth that transferred the patient. Then you look for the close contacts, which is immediate family members of a household who are in close contact, and that has turned out to be giving us 4 more cases. So when you start doing your mapping exercise, since the patient became initially ill or identified ill on the 27th of March, you have to go back 2 weeks before. And in that exercise is when we determined that the link would seem to be to an activity, a social event on the 14th of March, which would be more or less exactly in line with the patient falling ill and showing up with a pneumonia on the 27th of March.
Can I get some clarity there? This event on the 14th, was patient 10 already feeling ill at that time, or are you suspecting that the source of the COVID-19 transmission was at that event?
No, it would seem that the source was at the event, and that would fall in line because remember, most of the data suggests that day 2 to 14 after you have been exposed is when you're going to be having signs and symptoms. So we are assuming that that's where the patient became ill, and we have identified at least 2-3 persons that visited from the US and came to that social gathering on the 14th of March. And we assume that these people were asymptomatic.
So that was going to be my next question, because at that time on March 14th, there was still travel taking place in the country.
There was, and we were, and
you were doing surveillance at the airport.
Yeah, and we are also asking people, we had already started this notion of no gatherings. If you're coming from outside, you have to go into quarantine. So that obviously did not happen. I mean, you're talking about an event that had tens of people in there. I think at one point in time, this suggestion it could have been up to 100.
Wow.
Okay, so you're asking people who attended this party to get in touch with the Ministry of Health only if they're symptomatic or if they attended the party?
We have more or less gotten in the interviews, because you start to interview people along the way, and obviously interview the ones who are now ill as well. Particularly if you're symptomatic, because you understand that this is an event that happened a month ago to the day. So signs and symptoms would have not necessarily, I mean, if you are asymptomatic, then you're more than likely still asymptomatic. But we're still trying to find out where the linkages are. And now we're looking for morbidity and mortality cases. I mean, we're trying to zone in onto the people that are positive. Make, if you're ill, give you any adequate care before you really require any further medical care.
Can you provide us with an overall update on the recovery of patients, perhaps not on an individual basis, but the recovery of patients in both the Corozal and Cayo districts?
Yeah, well, the two patients that are in the hospital, those are, maybe we look at the ones who are not in the hospital. Those who are not in the hospital are having either minor signs or symptoms or have no symptoms, because you will note that some of these patients were picked up simply by the actual swabbing, not because they were ill. We picked them up simply because you were a close contact. So the vast amount of patients are not requiring any in-hospital care. 14 of these patients are actually at home in a self-isolation area. And I look at what that really means at the ground level and where we're going to go in that regard. The two patients that are in the hospital, the one in Corozal is no longer on IV medications. He's eating and drinking without any level of assistance, and most of the symptoms have disappeared. A patient that's at ICU in Carl Huschner has not required ventilation. He was there simply because of the respiratory problem, of which it still seems to have a little in terms of patients still not being able to do their routine walking around without them getting some kind of respiratory distress. Now, this has been documented in the literature. You know, people who have COVID-19, the recovery process is much, much longer. They say that up to 20 to 30% of your lung function is not routinely normal after having had COVID-19, and in the recovery process can be weeks, which is what we assume is happening with patient number 7, even though he's a younger adult. Both of them, I think, are going to recover completely. The period can be extended. We are going to determine this week what we are going to do with them in terms of their full recovery, whether it's going to be outside of Carl Huschner's ICU or whether they're going to be able to continue their recovery process at home. And in the issue of self-isolation, for the patients that we have, we are ensuring that they have a space at home that they can self-isolate, because whenever we determine that that can't happen, these patients who are determined to be positive will be taken somewhere else outside of a hospital.
Now, I wanna go back to the issue with the patient 10 case and the function on March 14th, if you'd allow me. So you said that this function had almost 100 people and that you're asking people to get in touch if they're symptomatic. But I'd imagine you're doing a mapping exercise. If each one of those 100 people came in contact with maybe 10, if they'd contracted the virus and they were asymptomatic, it could have spread much more beyond just the people at that party by this time.
Yeah, and that's why I started looking for any patient who showed up ill at Carl Huschner or any of the public hospitals, and that started some 10 days ago. In an effort to try to identify any cases that were escaping, assuming that you would have had asymptomatic individuals. All of those, what we call severe acute respiratory illnesses or influenza-like illnesses that showed up at public health facilities, we screened them for the last 3 or 4 days, whoever was in the hospital setting. None of them have turned out to be positive. One of the reasons why we're also asking people to call is so that we can determine your level of exposure and if any of your immediate contacts are ill, because not everybody who shows up at a gathering is going to have the same level of exposure. And so we want to have a more dynamic process as well, gather who was there and make a determination based on that.
Yeah, that's a very big mapping exercise. That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. So let's say I attended the party at March 14th and I felt fine. I could have potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, Dr. Manzanero, I could have potentially contracted COVID-19, not had any symptoms, and passed it along to every person, or potentially pass it along to every person I've come in contact with since that party. How do you map something like that?
Well, that's a part of the unknowns, and that's why when you start doing random testing, that's where
Okay.
um, it's again, you can have many asymptomatic carriers. It's the same thing with whoever may have infected the patient would have been an asymptomatic carrier because we don't know of anybody else that was ill as a result of that. The people who we have identified since then are people who are close contacts, not because they were ill.
Yeah.
So every patient is going to be different. Understand that some models suggest that up to 80% of a given population would be asymptomatic. So that means that 8 out of every 10 people would never have any sign or symptom. Case in point, this is what could potentially be happening. So for all intents and purposes, we go back to what we have also said as a message. We have going forward to assume that you meet on the street is COVID-19 positive.
So is it the assumption that we are in a community spread phase in Belize or in Belize district or the entire country?
For now, I think it could be primarily Belize City and the cluster in San Ignacio as well, where we don't know which one of the patients is the one that became ill first, whether it was patient number 4 or patient number 6, and I'm trying to keep my numbers, but that that little cluster, if you will, also has produced 5 patients that are positives in the San Ignacio area. And again, they probably, since 2 persons work in Belize City, they could have gotten it in Belize City and then brought it to the area. That's a possibility as well.
So where are we at the moment in terms of procurement of test kits, and where are we insofar as the number of tests that have been conducted using what we have in stock?
We are almost at 600 tests conducted. In one day, recall we did up to 102, and Friday, Saturday, we actually went into 3 different batches trying to get close contacts, healthcare workers of patient number 10. As I understand it, there will be arrival of further testing kits today with the Amerijet flight. So at the end of the day, I should be able to tell you how many testing kits we have. We did get a note from PAHO that they were in the process of procuring 11,500 individual tests to be for us to use in Belize.
Let's get some clarity. So last week it was reported that Belize turned away the 25,000 tests from South Korea. I know you have addressed the issue saying that it isn't the type of test that we need. Dr. Manzanero, can you explain to us what does that mean? Do we not have the machine? Do we not have the technical capacity, like we don't know how to do it? Or what is the missing element as to why we couldn't receive and use these tests?
Well, it's not only a question of human resource, but it's also, remember, once you're getting a test into any given country, you have to find out whether it's been validated, whether it's been approved for use, whether you have the in-country capacity, and if you don't, if you have to buy a machine for it. If you buy the machine, then do you have the in-country capacity to service, maintain it, get parts in terms of having a machine? The platform that we have is a PCR machine. Staff went to be trained on that specific platform. It is something that is routinely maintained in tandem with CDC. We get some technical support from PAHO in that regard. So whenever any offer comes to us, we still will ask our counterparts both at the CARFA level, at PAHO level, to see whether this is something that can be used, so that it's not only the staff from here that tells us whether it can happen or not. Through the weekend, for example, we got asked if there's a specific rapid test that could potentially be offered, whether that would be something that we could use. So we send it on to CARFA and PAHO for their advice, and based on that, we make decisions. So in this particular ones that were coming from South Korea, there's two types of tests that were in there. None of them had, when it came to my desk on the 24th of March, none of them in the little note that we got said that they had been approved by US FDA. Of course, if you go back now, maybe it has changed. I don't know. We have to go back and review where that is. But that particular note came for that, for those tests. And then the lab had the questions in terms of what other primers and enzymes you use for the test. and whether there would be any training for them in terms of the usage and validation of the test kits that are here. Maybe the analogy that in terms of test kits that have been updated, you recall HIV and the vast amount of rapid tests that are out there. Only three or four have been validated for use in Belize out of the wide array you have. So it's the same thing that has to be done in case there's any test that's coming to Belize. In discussions this weekend with PAHO, with what we are doing, and that's one of the reasons why they are sending 11,500 is because the platform that the German protocol that we use is the one that they are able to support most, and that's the reason why we are still following that specific testing guideline protocol.
So from what I understand from you, just to be explicitly clear, two things. One, the South Korean tests that were being donated had not at the time been validated by the FDA. Approved by the FDA.
In the notes we got.
Okay. Secondly, your technical staff, your medical lab technicians were not sure what elements would be needed to conduct the test. You talk about enzymes and reagents, but those are kind of the tools that you need to conduct the test. They weren't sure what the test would entail.
And whether we will have it or procure it separately.
Okay. Now, this is, of course, a concern for people because we are hearing from most international experts that the gold standard moving forward is to test as much as possible. And South Korea is a great example of that. What moves are we making locally? You speak of PAHO donating 11,000 more tests. What moves are we making to increase the coverage in testing?
We are aware of the test, but we are also careful in terms of what you're going to be doing with your testing. And I'm saying this because, again, through the weekend, in conversation with a couple of counterparts in Central American countries that rolled out rapid tests without really going through the approval in other entities, one of the nightmares they report or they are starting to have is the issue of false negatives. When you get a test and it's negative and you assume that the patient is negative when in point of fact they are positive, that can be a nightmare because assume you roll out false negatives and you get tests and you get lots of false negatives. False negative means the test comes back negative when in point of fact it is positive. That's the issue that you need to be careful of. So what are we looking at in terms of expanding the testing procedures that we have? We had mentioned that we have 2 gene export machines already. One in Belize City, one in Western Region and in Belmopan. We are looking at the procurement of 2 more, which is Dangriga and Oranjewang, because there is now some cassette platforms that are being developed so that the gene export machine can be used for testing. It allows you a quicker turnaround time, and if you have one in every region, then it makes it easier for you to process without overburdening the lab. So that's the second option we are looking at, and those have been approved already. But the production, as you will know, will first go to the countries such as the US that is producing it before they start rolling it out for other countries. So that platform we are...
So we'll have a faster turnaround with testing, with what you're saying?
Yeah,
okay.
And of course, we are on the lookout for rapid tests once they become widely available. Once we have, you note also that there's more than 70 companies now looking at producing rapid test kits. Once that has been approved and validated, I think that's where we're going to go. It's the same thing with HIV testing. Recall when we were doing that, everyone had to be processed for a confirmation test at Central Medical Lab, till eventually we now do 2 tests at the site, quick tests, and I think within 10-15 minutes you already are confirmed. I think that's the same process we're going to go through, but we need to be mindful of doing things the proper way, and understanding that we are not going to be in a lockdown forever. So maybe 6 to 8 weeks from now, we're looking at validated rapid tests, and that's where we're going to go. But for now,
go back a bit, Doc.
We have the platform, and that's where we're using it.
Let's go back a bit here. You mentioned a few moments ago the idea of false negatives. I can't help but think of patient number 10, whereas 2 tests were conducted on him while he was at the Belize Healthcare Partners Limited, and both occasions the test came back as inconclusive. Can you explain to us in this particular context what that means? And of course, you've alluded to the risk or the concern factors involved with persons who test negative in the first or second instances. What does this all mean?
Yeah, in the second instance, because the second time this person sample arrived at Central Medical Lab, the lab went to, was asking, okay, I have a second sample now, what's going on here? And they flagged it. So they went to a specific process. They tested it once, sample number 2, and it said it didn't detect any viral particles. So they did it again a second day. I think it was April 7th is when they tested it the first time. That's sample number 2. And they tested it again on April 8th, and they still found no RNA particles, no viral particles there. So they immediately flagged it for correction. Said, you know what, I am not finding anything. It could very well be that it was an improper swab, and that's the reason why the machine is not detecting any virus. And so that's why the patient was swabbed again on April 9th, and that's the third swab that he got. So a negative is simply because the machine is not detecting any particles. So it could also has to do with a technique, could be a technique in terms of what you're actually swabbing.
Fair enough.
So that also, you know, I mean, because this goes to a deeper issue. This is talking about whether or not healthcare workers are adequately trained to collect the sample. Because you could have a reliable test at the Central Medical Laboratory, but you have healthcare workers across the country collecting samples. Have they been adequately trained? Has the Ministry of Health and I know you're overwhelmed in terms of mapping exercise, but who is ensuring that they're using the right protocol so that you don't have the situation that you've had with patient 10 repeating again?
Well, we have been doing that routinely because prior to COVID-19, we have what we call sentinel sites where we swab people for other viruses. Remember, we do a weekly screening process in terms of influenza-like illnesses, severe acute respiratory illnesses. So we do routine swabbing in the public sector in terms of samples that get sent to Belize City for finding out any flu-like virus, influenza A, influenza B, and then the whole panel of other viruses that you can look for. So that happens routinely. And it's usually the same people, you know, people who have been trained. I mean, the conditions of the patient may also have to do with it. I mean, remember, if patients are not that symptomatic, viral shedding is not happening. So there's other factors that need to be looked at in terms of what happens.
So what you mean is they don't have like the runny nose, or it isn't as easy to get the fluids that you'd get if somebody is sick?
Yeah, I think this patient was intubated the second time the swab was taken. So there are other factors that need to be looked at without, knowing all the details in terms of this particular case. But for our staff, I mean, they have been routinely trained, and it's part of the routine duties that you do. It would be like taking blood, then, for example.
Okay. So
before we go, though, in terms of we go to another area, but in terms of testing, because I know test, but and even though 600 tests might not seem like a lot to many people, when you go and do the comparison in terms of testing for, you do it by rates then, because so that you're able to compare with other countries. Our testing rates in Belize are one of the higher in the regions. The last I checked yesterday, we were similar to the Costa Rican testing rates. I couldn't find testing rates for El Salvador, but definitely up to 17 times more than what Guatemala is doing, 4 times more than what Mexico is doing. And I'm not saying that as an excuse, but so that we can understand also and appreciate that 600 might not seem like a lot, but when you do it by rate, it is one of the higher in the country, and that doesn't mean that we are not going to stop testing. It's just to put it in that context. Then.
I'm glad that you've mentioned that, because to a great extent, aspersions have been cast based on the number of tests that have been conducted and the continued notion in the minds of many that a lot of us are walking around with COVID-19, but because testing isn't as often and as wholesale, if I may, that things are falling through the crack.
Yeah, but again, when you look at, and we're going to also start to do that exercise, who has been tested? Because that's also the question that has been asked. We have tested a good amount of people that have no link to the US, no travel history, but simply because they were very symptomatic. We have tested people who are in the hospital at both Karl Hirschner and at the regional hospitals, community hospitals. So the testing has happened, but we have not found those cases. So, and that doesn't mean that they don't have anything, you know. I mean, remember, in the past, we were screening for other viruses, and then we were testing for COVID-19. If you are now very symptomatic in a hospital facility, we test you for COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 test might be negative, but we have inverted it. We go and test you for the other flu viruses now after your COVID-19 test is negative, but that's the only thing we're reporting. It doesn't mean that people are not having other viruses or the common flu out there. So we need to make that very sharp distinction that we just inverted our testing procedures because of the relevance of COVID-19, but the work hasn't stopped.
So you used to test them for the flu first, then COVID, but now you're testing them for COVID first, and if it's negative, then you test them for the flu, the types of flu.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Manzanero, one of the scenarios that seem to be taking place is looking, and I guess it brings a bigger question as to the collaboration between the public healthcare system and the private institutions. In the case of case number 3, the first fatality.
No, that's
4. Sorry, case 4, the first fatality. He had visited private institutions and private clinicians before. In Corozal town, that recent patient, that may be 8 or 9, I'm really terrible at remembering the numbers. He visited a private physician as well. And now we're looking at case number 10, who also went to a private institution and in fact was intubated in the hospital with pneumonia. So my question is, while the public health system may have certain protocols in place and may be accessing tests easier, there seems to be, was it miscommunication? Is it that you aren't allowed? What is the problem here? Because those are 3 specific cases where they had first contact with private institutions or private physicians.
Well, actually, patient number 1 also had a contact with private institution.
That's
actually,
right.
that patient was swabbed at the private institution because the doctor, they called the public health doctor and the doctor went to do the swab there. Patient number 7, hospitalized at Karl Hirschner, also had a history of visiting private sector in the Cayo area before he showed up at the community hospital in San Ignacio. Now, we are looking at all those on an individual basis because it's not that they would not have had access to testing. I mean, once you swab somebody, then that swab should go on to Central Medical Lab. You just alert public health officials and we will do the testing as is required. And this is applicable not only to COVID-19, all communicable diseases. There's a specific form that's filled out, a specific alert that needs to be flagged, like when you have dengue, for example.
Yeah.
Dengue case that you detect, you should be reporting it to public sector so that we are able to go on and make our public health interventions in that regard.
But how do you reconcile the delays with all these cases, with the exception of case 1, the index patient?
Well, those have to be reviewed on an individual basis because I'm sure that everybody has a different way of how that was managed. So we are reviewing those individually, particularly the case of patient number 10 in the dialogue with a full report of what happened before they got there. And that becomes part of what we call a post-mortem analysis. We do post-mortem analysis in every single case. In every case that showed up, what is it that transpired and what could have improved? Yeah. If it's a communication issue, then that needs to be mended rather quickly because COVID-19 is not going to go away. It's here. I mean, every patient that you see, you have to potentially consider it as a COVID-19 suspect case.
So that brings me to another issue, and I understand that you have tested a number of close contact patients. They test negative. What happens then? Because we also know the incubation period can be 14. I know you recently said maybe up to 21 days, which means I could be negative now and then develop the symptoms a bit later?
Yes, so everybody who has been screened as a close contact of any identified case that is negative doesn't mean they're in the clear. And we need to really stress that, which means that even if you're negative right now, you will have to go into quarantine for 21 days. We said that effective yesterday. Quarantine period went up from 14 to 21 days. And at the end of, if you fall ill before that 21-day period has elapsed, then we will swab you again. And that has happened in 3 cases, I think.
What's the difference between quarantining someone versus the positive cases that are in self-isolation at home?
I think it's just a technicality, because self-isolation, we are referring for the patient who is ill, then the isolation becomes, much more strict in that regard. But you could use the same term so that people don't get confused. You basically just have to stay put then. I mean, if you're negative, you cannot be out on the street, you cannot be socializing, you still have to keep your own space in your own house, wherever you are, and ensure that you're not interacting with anybody until you have been given the clearance. And the clearance would come now at day 21 from when you were first swabbed. You have to be checked again at day 21, and based on that, make a decision.
Dr. Manzanero, there's a lot of trust being put in these persons who are either positive or close contact cases by asking them to self-isolate or quarantine at home. And this trust that you put in them is also at a high cost if they don't adhere, or if they're not disciplined enough to keep distance within their own homes. Why hasn't the ministry advised for people to be housed in a quarantine or isolation facility, since they've been identified across the country?
Yeah, that's a determination that it's a good question, in the sense that we have looked at it. It's also based on people's ability, not only the question of trust, but also having the space for you to go into a quarantine / self-isolation, because not everybody will have that ability. But I mean, we have good examples. If you look at what patient number 3, for example, completely in a floor by himself, no contact with anybody outside. Patients number 1 and 2 that basically kept to that one single area that they have. That's done on an individual basis. Once we have determined that you're positive, we'll go and find out where you live, how you're gonna get your basic food, your flow of inside your own home, whether there's a bathroom that you can use. But understand that moving forward, as you identify more cases, not everybody will have the ability to self-isolate home. So in those cases, those will be moved to the areas that we had identified for quarantining people, or people who need self-isolation but can't do it home and don't require hospital stay. Those are there. And those are done on an individual basis.
I guess my question isn't so much about the space issue. It's about the discipline that it requires. It's about knowing that even for one day, I won't have contact or socialize with anyone, even within my household. And I think that's the area where you would agree that the Ministry of Health can't police people 24/7. So there is a lot of trust being placed in these persons who are asked to self-isolate or quarantine.
Yeah, but that's following, I think, international guidelines. I mean, we had said it from before we had our first case. Not everybody will be in a hospital. Not everybody will be in this identified area. Some people will have to, if where possible, be managed from home. Yeah, that's a flip side. I hope that people can understand and appreciate that if I am positive in my home and I'm just taking it lightly and socializing with anybody, in 2-3 days, the entire family can be infected. And then what level of responsibility do you have as well? It's not only a question of trust, but it's levels of responsibility that we have to the immediate ones. I mean, making sure that people understand that anything that you do is going to have immediate impact on those who are close to you. Understand that also, once we put you up in a facility, or whether you're set up in a hospital, you will no longer have visitors. I mean, the visitor issue is gone through the window.
Yeah. Just before we close off, I think one of the things that I was also looking at is the number of tests in the other districts. We've been talking a lot about Belize City, San Ignacio, and now Corozal. Stan Creek and Toledo have about 23 tests so far, and Orange Walk, I think, just a bit more. It's very easy to become develop a sense of security that maybe they're not at risk. How would you explain the risk for these other districts?
Yeah, when you look at total numbers, indeed, Corozal, Belize City, Belize District actually, that includes the Keys, and Cayo would seem to have much higher numbers. But remember, those are contacts of the cases that have clusters, because if you notice, Corozal has 4 cases. What we are doing now is we're going to do a table. We have a table, actually, we just completed it last night, in terms of rates, testing rates. Just like I use the rates to compare to other countries, you have to do rates per district as well, because not every district has the same population. So, of course, Belize District has a bigger population, so their rate, once you do it, might be the same as the Toledo District, even though total numbers, it doesn't look like that. So the rate table, I think, gives us a better sense of how many tests you're actually doing per population that you have. And it's not a false sense of security. I mean, it doesn't mean that any of these 3 districts that they are down. It just means that you just have to continue to monitor, and your heightened surveillance remains.
All right. Well, and the final question, of course, is that people, once you've been watching international news or paying attention to anything COVID related, we always hear of flattening the curve or looking forward to that point where the cases will peak. What's your explanation as to where we are currently in Belize?
Well, the curve is certainly there for now. I know 2-3 weeks ago we were not talking about the curve. Actually, we are into our 4th week of having identified a first case. So the curve is there. The lockdown, if we really abide to it, if we are able to tease out these active clusters a little bit more, I think will bring out certain number of cases over the next 2 weeks. And then this has to be reassessed every week, of course. Ensure that you don't double your cases. That's what we're trying to do in terms of containment. But understand that you can also have what we call ups and downs, even in terms of a curve, because the lockdown is right now, but eventually as you move along, can you have a curve that this flattens and starts to go down, and you have another curve later on in the year? That can also happen. And then you're talking about lockdowns as you progressively move. I mean, it's a dynamic process. For now, we go in active case finding of these little clusters now, and make determinations as we go along in that regard.
All right. Well, we thank you for providing this update for us this morning. We know that seeing double the cases since we left off on Thursday to now Tuesday morning is definitely an area of concern for many. And once again, the Ministry of Health hotline is the number that people call if they're having any of the symptoms related. Before we close, can you tell us those symptoms once again?
Well, it can fluctuate, but one of the more common symptoms or documented symptoms is fever. They're not necessarily going to have a runny nose, congestion, fever, a little hoarseness, itchiness of the throat. And I think the cardinal symptom here is the progressive. Patients refer that they are progressively just feeling weak, that they are not, the fever is there, and increasing respiratory distress in people who are previously ill. Those, I think, are the hallmark issues that will drive somebody to a hospital.
All right.
But fever being one of the cardinal symptoms, and the particular issue that people refer. Of course, now 2-3 of our patients are referring the loss of sense of taste and smell, which has been documented elsewhere. 3 of our patients reported that as a starting symptom, so that's something that we need to look at as well.
Okay. And if you experience any of these symptoms, you call 0800 MOH Care. Thank you very much for providing this update, Dr. Manzanero.
Thank you.
All right. And there we have it. That was a conversation with the Director of Health Services, Dr. Marvin Manzanero, with the latest update on COVID-19 in Belize. Yeah. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. It seems to be a dual crisis at this time when we look at the economic issues and the health issues. And so we know a lot of people are pinching pennies right now. We'll have some advice from St. John's Credit Union after the break as to how to tighten up that budget. Please stay tuned.
COVID-19 update was brought to you by Full Tech Systems. You'll come for the price, but stay for the service.
And we're back, and we're moving into our second conversation for today. Of course, we know when we look at what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic and the current crisis that we are under, there is an immediate economic effect that people are experiencing. Many are unemployed, some have lost income, some are functioning on
limited budget.
Yeah, a very limited budget. So we asked some financial professionals to give us some tips, and we have Neil Wade, who is a credit officer at St. John's Credit Union, to talk to us about how to tighten up that budget to make the money last a bit longer. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, Sani. Good morning, everybody.
Of course, you're working from home, right?
Luckily, I'm working from home this week. As part of our plans to preserve our employees, we have a rotation basis where some employees have to go into the office and some get to stay home.
Okay.
But I'm still working nonetheless.
Okay, that's good to know. So Neil, I'm very sure that you guys have probably had an influx of people coming in to maybe access additional finances or get some money from their own accounts to be able to survive this very trying time.
Agree. Like you said earlier, I mean, we're in an economic crisis. So in that light, I would like to extend sympathies on behalf of our board of directors, our supervisor committee, our credit committee, our management team, and our staff who sympathize with what the country is going through. Currently, like you said, you have some cases where some people have a complete loss of a job, some have a reduced income, and then you have some investors, some owners who are not making any money. So it is a difficult time for everyone.
Yeah.
As an institution, this is one of the reasons why, as we would like to say, we call it the credit union difference, right? It's traditional, and people can tell you from, since we've been in existence since 1946, like all credit unions, we have a fundamental thing whereby in time of need, we are there for our members. So all our members, we have 4 locations, 3 districts, Belize District, the Cairo District, and the San Creek District. So our members have access to financing and access to whatever relief options we have available for those who have loans or need additional financing.
Okay. So let's talk about what people can do. There's a lot of spending taking place. In fact, when there was the announcement of the state of emergency and then the announcement of the state of lockdown, we saw people racing to the supermarkets and just buying up as much groceries as they can. And it's been a financial burden for many. What's your advice to people as to how to pinch the pennies?
Before I get into the spending, I just want to give one reminder. One of my good co-workers, Mrs. Nelly Wait Usher, she's a loan officer at our main office. She likes to remind me of the importance of savings. And a situation like this is a strong reminder of that you have to save. And one of the founding principles of the Christian movement is about saving for the rainy day, because you never know when the rainy day is going to come. But one thing you can bet on, the rainy day will come. And this present situation is considered a rainy day. So for those members who have been saving consistently, diligently over the years, it's no issue for them to come in and either they can access financing or withdraw from their savings, right? But again, since and agree there has been some panic spending, because you have all the rumors that the country is going on lockdown. You heard some people with some fake news talking about there will be no cargo coming into the country.
Yeah.
So of course, when you rely on those rumors, you forget about common sense, and so you just jump, and a knee-jerk reaction. But being practical and being realistic, you realize, okay, we have to remain calm. Your normal common sense kicks in, and you realize, okay, we have to try to operate as best as possible nonetheless. So in terms of the spending and from a financial point of view, again, goes back to the basics, budgeting. In this case, it's an extreme scenario. We're in a crisis, so we have to, whatever amount of money we do have available, we have to spend wisely, right?
Yeah.
So we go back to the basic. We always recommend having a written budget. It's good to have ideas and stuff in your mind, but at a time like this, you want to put pen to paper. If you don't have, if you don't prefer paper, you prefer a budget app. But make sure you have something that is documented. All right. Again, now as you go through this budget, you want to list items you need, not what you want. Right now, there's no time or no money for no luxurious items. We need to keep it simple. We need to keep it urgent, right?
Let me
Next
ask. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The next thing I recommend is take the budget when you go shopping. Don't rely on memory, especially now when you get into the stores and you already have to wait so long just to get into the store. So you might remember what you might need. You might forget what you told you to buy or what your husband told you to buy. So I'd recommend taking the budget when you go shopping. Also, based on the different circumstances and the curfews and the lockdowns, I would recommend try shopping once a week. It's easier that way. Again, also the shopping once a week allows you to practice social distancing, you know?
Let me ask you this, Neil. This is sort of a preface to what Marlene initially asked. When we realized that COVID-19 was imminent in Belize, a lot of financial institutions started offering loans and access to monies, perhaps at reduced interest rates or little to no interest rate at all. How prudent do you find this to be in terms of persons who are already on half of their salary or people who have perhaps lost employment as a result of this crisis?
That's a very good question, and a lot of thinking has to be, inputted into it from both sides, from the financial institution and from those persons that are affected by this, directly, especially those that are affected negatively, where they don't have a source of income. For our credit union, which is a not-for-profit organization, we are lending money that we hold for other members. So there is no way we can simply give grants. And it would be highly unlikely for even the banks to give grants. At the end of the day, certain institutions are in business to make a profit. Yes, we sympathize and empathize with all those persons affected negatively by COVID. So I think a lot of the banks are offering refinancing at reduced rates. For the businesses, I know they are giving at least 3 months to maybe 6 months of grace period of non-payment on their loans. I know some of the banks are even offering financing to help these businesses to gap and to bridge during this time of no earnings. So it's a situation where everybody has to work together. And I think the institutions are doing their part in terms of trying to assist persons affected by COVID.
Yeah. And it's also, I think one of the things that people are concerned about, if you don't pay a payment in 3 months' time, you still have to pick it up eventually.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of being able to still take care of yourself in the short term, but not lose sight of the long term as well. And that's a challenge. As a credit officer, I'm sure that's kind of what you're trying to bring people to reality, bring that reality to people when you talk to them.
Exactly, because some people are of the impression that we're giving grants. I'm sure if any institution could afford to give grants, they would. But especially for credit unions, being non-profit organizations, we are relying on members' funds to lend to other members. So at some point, we have to provide them with the returns on their investments within the credit union. So again, like I said, we sympathize and empathize with those persons negatively affected by COVID, but it would be difficult to simply give them money during this time.
So here's
right?
a scenario to paint. Here's a scenario to paint, Neil. My observation is that ahead of this thing reaching Belize, driving around, you saw long lines of persons who are waiting to borrow monies, both from the credit union and from other financial institutions. And this is in the context of panic buying, right? So money becomes available to on lend, and persons come in and access those monies. They go into all of these supermarkets and what have you, purchase as many grocery items or whatever as they need, including toilet paper and what have you. But everyone is at home. You have mothers, fathers, kids, etc. People are now cooking 3 meals a day, 3 different meals a day, utilizing all the groceries that they've purchased. And remember, these are persons who, for some have reduced income, and for others have lost income. At the end of the day, that financial responsibility is still there. And these are some of the same people who are now calling and asking for assistance otherwise, because they have spent out the money that they've borrowed and they've consumed those items before really scheduling it out over the month, 2-month period that we're going to be in during this crisis. How do you look at something like that?
And that's a very good reality and a very practical scenario as well, because they're saying we're at home, we have nothing to do, so a lot of people are joking that maybe they'll gain some more weight more than anything else, right?
Yeah.
But going back to being prudent, you have to realize, and I mean, it's a lot of inexperience on our part as a country. I mean, it's the first time in our history we're experiencing a global pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, normally we know how to plan for a hurricane, so we know what to do. You know, it's normally maybe a week, 2 weeks we have to plan for, and we're okay after that. But with this global pandemic, it changes the entire ball game, and I think our inexperience as a country and as a people is showing. For example, like you said, we had panic shopping. And for example, you would take your limited resources and buy some items that you might not need for so long.
Yeah.
So that management of the resources was not done properly. Thankfully, I mean, for the persons who are unemployed, they have a higher challenge of maintaining those limited resources that they do have. And I think I pray that this thing doesn't last as long as 2 months, because then what we do. So we, as with you guys with this show and having people like myself come on here and explain that you need to remain calm, you need to be prudent, and manage those limited resources.
So let's get into some tips for people. What are some of the major financial mistakes that people can make during this time that you'd like to advise against, or ways that they can make, even if it's the 150 unemployment benefit, stretch as much as possible?
Well, I think Isana just touched on the biggest mistakes that we could make. That was the panic shopping.
Okay.
I think after the Prime Minister came out and said that there's no need to worry that cargo will come into the country, that will not stop. So as you know, we are an importing country, so we rely heavily on imported goods to feed ourselves. So since that is okay, and we realize that import will still continue, so we can continue, the panic shopping can cease, we can get over that first initial reaction of shopping like crazy.
The sky is falling.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. So now we can calm down, catch our breaths, and like you said earlier, Marlene, we have to prepare for the short term and the long term.
Yeah.
This pandemic will be a marathon, and for those marathon runners, it takes your time, so it's better to pace yourself, and especially for people where we're limited resources, it's going to be challenging. So you guys have to be more prudent in terms of how you spend your money.
Okay. So that's one of the key things that I keep on hearing from you. So I know we feel like we have to go out and purchase a lot of items because we're going to be at home. But 2 things. One, even under the lockdown measures, we're allowed to go and do some shopping at the store. And secondly, with the continued flow of imports, we know that the grocery stores are in fact going to be stocked up as time progresses. So we don't have to spend a lot of money at once, but just You're saying weekly is a good time to buy, with a list, of course?
Yeah, I would recommend weekly because at the same time you want to practice isolation
Yeah.
and social distancing. You know, I think the best strategy against this COVID is prevention is better than cure.
Yeah.
Especially we don't have a cure. So in order to stay safe is to keep away from each other for right now. Practice the social distancing, practice the isolation. I mean, thanks to technology, we can still stay in touch.
Yeah.
It's not we'll be apart totally.
What about running
You know?
up other bills? Because you talk about technology, people are at home, they're using more electricity. Inflatable pools are sold out. People are using more water.
Yeah.
So what we may not realize is that we're actually consuming more and increasing our cost of living in that meantime.
I agree. Seeing that we're at home, nothing to do. Normally your water bill, your light bill would be at a certain amount because of your consumption. Normally the kids are at school, the parents are at work. But since the roles are reversed, now everybody's at home. We have to monitor those consumption. I mean, literally I try to put my kids on a schedule as it comes to their tablets because every minute they want to be charging their tablets or their cell phones.
Yeah.
So there is a lifestyle adjustment that we have to take into consideration. Thankfully, some of the utility companies are offering some COVID relief options. So at the same time, we want to maximize those options that they're offering.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to be mindful that we don't want to overuse them,
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely something we want to take into consideration. And then the other matter I wanted to ask Neil, some people may be getting a reduced salary and they have other financial obligations. It's very tempting to perhaps take some of the relief from the financial institutions when in fact they may be able to meet some of their payments. What's your advice in terms of which ones you should pay versus which ones you should take advantage of the relief?
Again, it goes to your current situation. Again, you go back to the basics. Your budgeting, you look at your numbers. Again, you try to document it, and then if you're in a position where you don't need the relief, then you don't take it.
Yeah.
Right? And you simply, because your bills need to be paid, your loan payments need to be paid and kept up to par.
Yeah.
Again, life goes on after COVID. So these bills are simply on pause for the short term. But I would advise if you can afford to pay your loans, then you pay them.
Yeah. All right. Any other advice for people as we wrap up as to how to pinch the pennies as we go through the pandemic?
Take your time, stay calm, catch your breath, pace yourself. Like you said, we want to take care of ourselves in the short term, but at the same time, we want to maintain for the long term.
Yeah.
Spend wisely. I mean, the credit union thing is, we save safely and we borrow wisely.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Neil. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, guys. Take care, Marlene.
Stay safe. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Same to you guys.
All right. So there you have it. How to pinch those pennies. And I know we don't want to think about it.
You kept repeating one very important word, and that is prudence.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to look at what you have in front of you, budget it properly over the period of time that you will be, quote unquote, down for. Because at the end of the day, bills are still going to be around, very much so.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I got in that final point. I think sometimes, it's easy to think, okay, if I don't have to pay my loan, I won't, so I won't pay for 3 months, but
you'll defer the payment.
You still have to pay it. You're still going to get back to that point where you have to pay it. So if you can right now, go ahead and do so. The same with your mortgage and all. But this situation is really looking at people who've lost jobs, taken a cut sometimes as much as half of their salary, who really can't make those payments. That's who it's for. Don't just think that you get extra money for the month, because you will pay it eventually.
I think one of the And just a quick point here. What wasn't necessarily said, or perhaps it was, but it wasn't really fleshed out per se, is the fact that this is new to us.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So while we have saved for a rainy day, this is a new kind of a rainy day,
Yeah.
which was completely unforeseen. So going forward now, we have to look at how we save for times like these specific unknowns. I think is critical.
Yeah, because we say for a rainy day, not a rainy season, like what this is.
A rainy 3 months.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the things that Neil said, it's so strange because I also felt that very same urge at the mention of the lockdown that maybe I should go to the supermarket and get some extra stuff. It's just, I guess it's a psychological response in some way that you're going to be restricted, so you should perhaps go and get some more during that time. And then I checked myself and I reminded myself that I did already have enough groceries and that I will be able to go over the next 2 weeks as well. So it takes a moment to just bring that sense of calm back to yourself. But it's natural that we all feel that way.
I'm laughing because one of the immediate things that came to mind was, okay, perhaps I need to get some money and I need to now go and buy $1,000 worth of items, right?
See?
And then I check myself and say, is that really within my means in the immediate, short term? And I said, no. If I still have a job and I'm still collecting my salary, treat with it as you would on a 2-week basis because you'll get paid again. So you don't need to jump ahead of yourself and buy all of these things. You overwhelm yourself in the process of so doing. And at the end of the day, you still have to pay back for it. Right?
And you know, because our only other sense of emergency has been hurricanes, which is a completely different scenario, but with some similarities. So we do stock up for hurricanes, but we don't know what's going to be the aftermath. We don't know about refrigeration. We don't know about opening of stores or access to stores. The difference, and this could be a little silver lining with this one, is that we do know we'll continue to have the inflow of what we need in the supermarket. We will have access. We do have refrigeration, so you can still get your cold stuff and get that in there and do your cooking. So don't feel the need to just go out and extend yourself in a way that you won't have any money in the next few weeks.
And just to wrap up my end here on the matter, you mentioned silver lining, Marlene. When I look at it from a point of view of any modicum of optimism here, is that while we're under a particular crisis, all infrastructure remains intact.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're losing on specific services or physical things, so to speak, right? You could still be able to go to the store when things return to normal. You'll still be able to carry on with your life insofar as perhaps going back to work and doing other stuff, because unlike a hurricane where trees are blown down and roofs come off, you won't have those kind of expenses to deal with. It's only a matter of kind of picking up the pieces proverbially and moving forward.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are a lot of people out there right now who have no income, who have taken a significant cut in their incomes, and that can be scary. We of course want to we will have an update, I'd imagine, on the unemployment benefits and how that rollout is going. It was near 60,000 by the end of last week. I can't imagine, you know, that's a very significant number. And looking forward, I think that we'll have to see how people are doing. But in the meantime, just try to curtail your expenses. And I know it's easy for us to say versus actually doing, but we have to keep in mind that this is going to be for an extended period of time. You know, there may be a few more weeks. We don't know. And so you have to keep that in mind as we move forward. But that's it for the financial segment. We're going to take a break. When we come back, a lot of people at home are going to be looking forward to this. So we have a special segment talking about doing your hair at home. So please stay tuned.
What's better than unlimited text messages with your postpaid plan? How about unlimited national calls 24/7? Doesn't get any better than that, right?
And we are back. And so there's a lot of changes that we have to adjust to during this time. A lot of comforts that we've had have been taken away from us temporarily. And of course, this is all in the attempt to keep ourselves safe and our loved ones safe. So we've been hearing the complaints, and we have seen some of the issues ourselves. The guys can't get their haircuts. The girls can't get their hair did, and we're going to try to bring you some tips as to how to take care of this stuff at home. We have with us the owner of Purple Passion Studio Spa in Keycocker, Stacy Badillo. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Stacy is gonna help the ladies today. So a lot of ladies need a touch-up maybe like 2 weeks ago. And they won't be going to the salon anytime soon. So Stacy, you'll be talking us through some do-it-yourself tips, right?
Yes, definitely. We'll go through some basic, easy hair color.
Okay, so I imagine all your clients have been calling you and asking you how to do this.
Yes, definitely. And Purple Passion is now offering home hair kits, hair coloring kits.
Oh.
We're preparing them in-house here, and we're delivering it to them as part of social distancing. So yeah, and then they do an online transfer for us to get the cash, or we do the cash directly with them.
Oh, wow. That's some innovation for the specific time.
Yes, definitely. So I want to go through, you can always ask your hair professional what color you're using on for root touch-up.
Okay.
Professional hair color starts from 1 being the darkest and 10 being the lightest.
Okay.
So let's say you have a natural, I would say this is like a number 5 hair color, which is a dark natural brown. Your professional should be able to provide you with those hair colors.
Okay. So that's the first thing. Call your salon and find out what color you have.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. So in order for us to start this, the first thing you need to do is put on your gloves.
Okay, but I have a question before that. So not everyone is going to be able to get your at-home kit right now. So the ladies are going into the stores and kind of just trying to pick from which box is best for them. Any advice as to how to buy dye to be used at home?
Yes, definitely. So let's say you have highlights, because a lot of people have highlights and they just want to block out that dark color, which is the regrowth from the highlighting area. Let's say you look at a box hair color.
Yeah.
And do a color 1 step lighter in order for you to get the color that you're looking at on the box. I don't know hair colors by names in the box, but let's say you're looking for a shade of brown. Do 1 color lighter in order for you to get that color.
Okay. That's some good advice. So don't go by the color on the box. In fact, you want to look for something lighter than what you actually want.
Yes.
Okay,
correct.
great. All right.
So if you're doing this at home and you don't have brushes, I had a client that, we provide all these things for them, brushes and everything like that. But let's say you don't have a brush. Usually when you buy a hair color, it comes with a bottle applicator. This is actually easier if you're doing this at home.
Okay.
Doing with the bottle applicator. But it just depends on what your personal preference is. So remember, the hair grows about ½ inch every month. So, and you get root touch-ups anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Maximum time will be 8 weeks, which a lot of clients already, I've been closed since March 23rd, so I can imagine my clients wanting their hair color.
Yeah.
So the first thing, if we would start, we want to make sure we have a towel. You would put that around you, or use an old t-shirt, because if you get color on it, you don't have to worry about it. You can just toss it out. That's almost easiest.
Okay.
Don't do it in your bathroom if you have white tiles everywhere, because it could be messy.
Okay.
So let's choose a surface that is non-porous, or a dark towel, or something that you don't mind ruining, or something that won't show the color. Like I use mostly bath towels for hair coloring.
Okay.
So hair coloring, when you buy it in the box, it's equal, so it's 1-to-1 ratio. But let's say you're doing a root touch-up, you might only need half of that tube. So you can actually just squeeze half of that, and in the little bottle applicator, you can just take out half of that product, because it might be too much if you use the entire container if you're just doing your roots.
Yeah.
Before you actually start, you want to make sure that you brush out that hair to get all those knots out, you know, because it's easier to just section off that hair and start working.
Okay.
People with, you have a question?
No, I'm paying attention.
So if you notice my mannequin here, Tina is her name. I work on her a lot. My daughters actually cut their hair as well. I do 4 sections
Okay.
for the hair. This is easiest. For some people, their hair naturally falls in the middle. If not, their hair, you know, falls sometimes like a little bit off.
Okay.
You know, it's not exactly in the middle. It just falls a little bit off. That's the first place that you want to put the hair color. So if her hair naturally falls like this, I would leave it like this and put that hair color in there first.
Okay.
Because naturally that's where the hair is going to fall, and if you have the gray in there or you're trying to blur out that dark roots, that's where it's going to be more visible. So that's where you want to start. But just for even sections, I'm going to keep it like this.
All right, so the first thing, clear your hair, put it in sections.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And we're going to analyze now. If you have highlighted here and you're just trying to blur out the dark roots, you're going to start your application from the back because it's a lighter hair color, and the back of your hair sometimes is darker and it takes more time to process.
Okay.
If you have very heavy gray hair, and all your gray is concentrated on the front of your hairline, which you have that with a lot of mature clients. You want to start with that hair color immediately on the hairline, especially right around the ears. That's where that concentration of gray hair mostly is at.
Okay, so you apply first on the area that will take that you need to cover the most.
Correct.
Okay.
If you're doing a dark hair color and just touching your grays, that's where you're gonna start first. If you have highlighted dark hair and you just want to lift your hair color to a shade lighter, you will start that application at the back.
Okay.
And before you start any dark hair color process, you actually want to put some petroleum jelly on the hairline. Just to keep it clean when you're done. It's not all over your forehead and your eyebrows and everything. So I'm actually not going to use hair color. I'm just going to use a little bit of peroxide just to show demonstration of the application in the hair. This is actually human hair, and she does have gray hair, so I don't color her hair. We cut, we wash, we treat her hair just as any natural hair.
Okay, so just walk us through the application then. Go ahead.
Yes, I'll walk you through the application. So, as I said, in order to stay organized, we're going to section the hair by 4 to start there. If you notice, we're gonna do the crown to right to the back of the ear. That's an easy way to section your hair, just so you know. So as I said, we would start right at the middle. And you can overlap this hair color a little if it's a dark hair color. You can, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And I'm going to do all the outer edge immediately. And I like lifting the hair and doing that underneath section.
Okay.
On the ears. And when we start sectioning, you would take about ½ inch. No thicker than ½ inch, because you want that hair color to fully saturate on both sides. So you can take that brush and do the bottom, the top, and it's like turning a page. You take another section and you turn that page.
Yeah. Now, if you don't have a brush, though, if you're using one of those bottles that come with the kits, the ones that you just squeeze,
Yes, and so I have that here. And this tip actually works as a sectioning at the same time. So you take the same thing without squeezing the bottle, because once you squeeze the bottle, the product is coming out. But if you tilt the bottle, the product is not coming out. So sectioning, I would take half an inch, the same, and then I would squeeze that hair color right in there like a gentle little line, and I can just go and do all of that. Not combing in the product yet, just sectioning and just lining off. So this is a faster way of doing it. See how fast I can actually get in there and doing that application of that. So I'm sectioning and I'm putting a line in there. When I've done all of that, I would take a comb and just comb that product.
Yeah. I thought you had to apply it and comb it down immediately.
This is the easy. I try to find the ways for you to do it the easiest, because remember, this is people doing it at home.
Oh, of course.
And some clients are scared of doing this. They're like, why do I have to do this? But at the same time, they don't want to look at their gray hairs, right?
Yeah.
So this is just, and so each processing time is different for each client. If it's regular, some people just have a few gray hair and they just want to blur that out. We would say 30 minutes and it's fine for processing time. If you have heavy gray stubborn hair, processing time would be up to 45 minutes.
Okay.
So it all depends.
So no more than 45 minutes?
No, because like every hair color has a different procedure and waiting time, but most hair colors stop working after that 45 minutes.
Okay. All right. So that's another good tip there. And what about washing it out? So when the 45 minutes is up, what do?
You jump in the shower, wash your hair out.
Any a shampoo, conditioner that should be different?
Yeah. Yes. Here at the salon, we use all sulfate or salt-free shampoo and conditioner. It's best for any hair color processing. It doesn't strip the natural oils from the hair. It keeps the hair shinier. So I would highly recommend that. And you can actually pick that up. Now it's so popular. Any of the beauty stores, the grocery stores, all those stores sell sulfate or salt-free shampoo and conditioner.
Okay, great. Any other advice that you'd offer to people for their at-home hair care?
I would say try not cutting your hair if you don't need to. Some people say, oh my gosh, the ends of my hair, the split ends, it's getting terrible. I tell them we're only in this time in our lives for not permanently, it's temporary.
Yeah.
So we'll all be able to walk freely again and come to salons and spas and be able to hug each other.
And what about the guys? I do have to tell you that there are different phases. I read an article about the different phases of the pandemic. The first phase is where people buy hand soaps and hand sanitizers and disinfectants. The second is when they buy toilet paper. And the third is when they go out and they buy hair color and hair clippers. So for the men especially who can't get to a barber shop, any tips for them?
Definitely. I would say like my Facebook page and Instagram page, we will be posting videos. I also have videos there now.
Yeah.
A lot of the, tips and tricks we'll be sharing there because I have a clientele base as well that's asking all these questions.
Yeah.
So I try to just one video a day. It takes me more time to edit it and upload it, but I've been working behind the scenes in order to help you being able to take care of yourself at home.
All right. Well, Stacey, we really appreciate the tips this morning. We know that the ladies have been a bit concerned about not getting their color in. And as you said, it is a simple process you can do at home now that we've gotten some of your suggestions.
Thank you.
Once again, that Facebook page is Purple Passion Studio Spa. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get moving. That was for the parents, for the moms especially. Now we're going to move into kids time. And of course, this segment is brought to you by J&W Shopping Mart. You can go ahead, parents, get the kids, bring them in front of the television as we get this segment started. Today, Dr. Binox is going to be teaching us about the solar system.